Hey, I'm Cory.
And I'm Laura, and today we're talking about fun stuff, funny stuff, and things that will blow your mind.
All right, Laura, you need to tell me the most ridiculous story you've ever heard.
Well, one time a good friend of mine actually was on a TV show, a really funny TV show, where you had to get across these 4 big slippery red balls across a big pond of water, and other people had trained for this for months, and he somehow got across, even though it was not pretty.
Hey, you know what? I made it across, and that's all that matters.
I guess. I think it's pretty cool, and that brings us to the big idea for today. We can trust God even when it seems a little bit ridiculous. Watch this.
How long did Cain hate his brother? As long as he was able. Hi friends, my name is Paige. So, a few months ago I did a play and I had to play a character that was super clumsy. I felt totally ridiculous falling all over the stage. But the audience loved it and everyone was laughing. So, sometimes in our lives, there are things that God asks us to do that can look ridiculous to others. Like giving away a whole bunch of money to a good cause or moving to a rough neighborhood to be a light there. Other times, there are times when it feels ridiculous to continue trusting God because the situation seems so impossible. But we know that today's big idea is we can trust God even when it seems ridiculous. So today we're going to continue to learn from the story of Abram from Genesis 17 verse 1 to 22. Last time we learned a bit about this guy named Abram. He was a good man who loved God, and God loved him a lot. There's a part in his story when he was 99. God came to him and said, well, let's read it from the Bible. I am the mighty God. Walk faithfully with me. Live in a way that pleases me. I will now act on my covenant between me and you. I will greatly increase the number of your children after you. This is my covenant with you. So, hold on. You're probably wondering what a covenant is. A covenant is an agreement between God and people. Let's keep reading. You will be the father of many nations. You will not be called Abram anymore. Your name will be Abraham, because I have made you a father of many nations. The name Abraham actually means father of many. Cool, right? God goes on to tell Abraham that he will increase the number of his children, and nations and kings will come from him. Their covenant will last forever between God and Abraham's family. God also promised that he would give Abraham all of the land of Canaan that he is currently living on as an outsider. Then God told Abraham that him and his whole family had to keep this covenant. God changed Abraham's wife's name from Sarai to Sarah, and God promised that Abraham and Sarah would have a son. Now, remember at the beginning of the story, we learned that Abraham is 99 years old. That's really old. So Abraham fell on his face and began to laugh. He was 99 and his wife was 90. Imagine a great-grandparent finding out they were going to have a child. It seems ridiculous. God told them to name their son Isaac. Isaac means laughter or he laughs, which is pretty great when you think about the ridiculousness of a 100-year-old man having a child. God promised to make his covenant continue on through Isaac. Once God finished telling Abraham all of this, he left. Wow, can you imagine what that might have been like for Abraham? Abraham trusted God, but this situation is so incredible. A 90-year-old woman and a 99-year-old man expecting a baby? It's ridiculous. But Abraham had a relationship with God, and he knew from past experiences that he could trust God in all things, even the strange or ridiculous things. As Jesus followers, we know we can trust God. We know that because we have a relationship with him, that reminds us of the ways that we have been able to trust him in the past. And so that can be helpful when times seem ridiculous or impossible. We can remember that we can trust God even when it seems ridiculous. My name's Paige, I had a blast, and I'll talk to you soon.
Linda went out to talk to a few people to get their most ridiculous stories about trusting God. Watch this.
I'm back again in this series on trust, where Cory and I have been connecting with different people to hear how they trust God in their lives. Today, I'm going to hang out with a few different people who each have experiences that in one way or another may seem ridiculous, but when you trust God with all of your life, things can get interesting. I'm here with Alex, who has a story that sounds pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was working on a feature film, and we wanted to shoot a scene at a fall fair. And so we did our paperwork, we got our permits, and off we went. And that night, I was on camera, and we had been shooting for hours and hours, and finally, we had filled up our memory card. And so I took it out, put it in my pocket, completely forgot about it. And as the night went on, we took off, just so happy we got what we wanted. A few days later, I went back to the studio, and I couldn't find the memory card anywhere. So I started panicking, I was freaking out, but I decided to take a moment and just pray to God. And I felt in my spirit God saying, the memory card is back at the fall fair. So I got back in my car, drove there, parked the car, opened the door, and sitting in the grass was the memory card. You know how small this thing is? This is tiny. In that moment, I thought, how is this memory card still sitting here? How hasn't some kid just picked it up or someone run over it with their car? And I ended up taking the footage back to the studio, editing an amazing scene that didn't end up making the final cut of the movie.
Natalie set out on an exciting new adventure to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And while she was there, she asked God to speak to her in new and different ways. Natalie, why don't you tell us about that?
The Camino de Santiago is this massive 800-kilometer hike, and I chose to do the last 120 kilometers of it. And while I was on that journey, I had this really cool experience with God. I asked him to speak to me in new and fresh ways, and he definitely did. So this one day, I had been praying about a relationship that I was having some difficulty with, and I wasn't really sure what to do. And so I had spent time as I walked praying about it, and when I had finished walking that day, I'd walked about 18 kilometers and spent a lot of that time talking to God. And I took a shower and pulled out all of my fresh, dry, comfy clothes. And one of the things that I had bought on that journey was a pair of underwear. And so I pulled out this pair of underwear, and on the inside band of the underwear, it actually said, "Be the light." And I know it sounds ridiculous, but it actually felt like that was God's answer to prayer. He was telling me that in that relationship, I need to be the light. So I ran into the bathroom, and don't worry, I was fully clothed, yelled to my friend. I was like, Nina, I think God just spoke to me through my underwear. And she laughed and thought it was completely ridiculous. I knew in that moment that that was God's answer to my prayer about my relationship. He wanted me to be the light. And I think that God does choose to speak to us in kind of ridiculous or sometimes even bizarre ways. And because I know him and I trust him, I know that that was him speaking to me.
I loved these stories. With each one, I think, really? But then I realized that God is not restricted in the way that he communicates with us.
Yeah, he wants to communicate with us in ways that can blow our minds. We simply need to ask him, be ready to receive it, and trust him when he does.
I totally agree, Cory. Let's break into our small groups now and see what this looks like in our lives.